Pedro woke up every day at 5 a.m. before the sun had even risen. He was already on the sidewalk with his light blue pickup truck, old but reliable. At 36 years old, with a face weathered by time and the California sun, he lived in the same middle-class neighborhood where no one really knew his name. To the neighbors, he was just the gardener. But to those who truly knew him, like Mrs. Martha, an elderly lady whose lawn he had mowed for over 10 years, Pedro was so much more. He brought her flowers from the local market when she was feeling down, cleaned her roof for free, and always repainted her fence before Christmas. He lived with his wife, Rosa, and their 2 young children, Emiliano and Camila, in a small rental unit behind someone else's house. He paid his taxes using an I-10 number, even without legal residency. He had never gotten into trouble, never made demands, didn't drink, didn't smoke. All he wanted was to work, care for his family, and watch soccer on Sundays. At school, the kids got good grades. Pedro always said, "You're going to study so you don't have to carry a shovel like me." Camila, just 9 years old, replied sweetly, "But Papa, I like your job. You make gardens look beautiful." Pedro smiled, touched, but deep inside, he always carried a hidden fear, a knot in his stomach that never went away. He never told Rosa, but sometimes he dreamed of sirens. He dreamed of knocking at the door, of being taken away. And he would wake up sweating, breathing fast. But then he'd hear his daughter's voice from the other room. "Papa, the sun is coming up," and he'd carry on. As always, every Monday. Pedro started in the Encino neighborhood. Large yards, freshly cut grass, flower beds that demanded precision. He knew every bush, every planted flower. He knew the lilies at House 1425 bloomed in June. That Mr. Goldberg liked his boxwoods trimmed with military symmetry. And that the dog from the yellow house always stole his gloves. Pedro never complained, no matter the heat or the aching in his back. There was dignity in what he did, and more than that, pride. His services were always paid on time, but not everyone looked him in the eye. Many just left the money in an envelope on the porch. Others waved from afar as if the gardener was just another piece of the scenery. On his way home, he stopped at the Mexican market downtown. Rosa was waiting with hot coffee and fresh tortillas. They ate together in the backyard, watching the kids run around barefoot. "Today, the lady said she recommended me to her sister," Pedro said excitedly. "Another house?" Rosa asked hopefully. "Yes, it'll help with the rent." Nights were simple: dinner, homework, quiet laughter. The small TV showed old soap operas and news in Spanish. Sometimes, Pedro secretly watched immigration debates. On CNN, his expression grew tense. "They talk as if we were a threat," he murmured. "You're no threat to anyone," Rosa said firmly. "You're the most honest man I've ever known." Pedro held her hand tightly. He knew he was living on an invisible line, and that it would take just one misstep or one whim of fate for everything to collapse. But still, the next day, he would rise early and go back to tending gardens that weren't his own. It was a humid Thursday afternoon when Pedro received the call. He was trimming the azaleas in Mrs. Bloom's garden, a kind widow who always offered him lemonade when his cell phone buzzed in his pocket. "Pedro, this is Javier. I need to tell you something. ICE made a raid this morning near Jefferson Avenue. They took 2 guys from our church. One was a plumber, the other worked in cleaning. Nobody expected it." Pedro felt his body go cold. He instinctively looked around. Nothing but quiet streets, trimmed trees, and kids riding bikes. "Did they have a warrant?" he asked quietly. The clock read 6:12 a.m. when the pounding on the door echoed through the house. It wasn't just any knocking. 3 sharp knocks, followed by firm voices, immigration, and customs enforcement. "Open the door." Pedro froze in the hallway. He was still wearing his faded gray t-shirt and the cap he always wore to work. Rosa came running from the kitchen, frightened. Camila and Emiliano appeared in the hallway, sleepy and confused. "Dad, what's happening?" whispered Emiliano, clutching his father's arm. Pedro pulled them back, trying to stay calm. "Stay in the room, please, be calm." The door shook again with more force. Rosa held his hand. "Pedro, ... They can't come in if you don't open, but they will, with or without my permission." He took a deep breath and opened the door. 6 ICE agents stood on the porch. Black vests, guns on their belts, cold expressions. One read his full name, Pedro Mateo Galvez. You are under arrest for immigration violations. Wait, ... My kids are citizens. I pay taxes. I've worked here 14 years, Pedro said, trying to keep his voice steady. That will be addressed in court. Now turn around and put your hands behind your back. The click of handcuffs broke something inside Rosa. She ran to the children, trying to hide the scene, but Camila saw everything. Dad, no. Pedro looked one last time at the three, as if trying to memorize every face, every tear. I'll come back, I promise. But even he knew that promise was made with a tight throat and a broken heart. In the street, neighbors peeked through curtains. No one came out, no one said a word. The invisible gardener was being taken away, and no one saw. But nobody saw anything. They just showed up and took them. One of them has 3 kids, like you. Pedro hung up silently, wiped the sweat from his forehead. His hands trembled slightly. He took a deep breath, tried to focus on his work, but the clippers faltered. Every distant siren sounded louder. Closer that night, Rosa noticed his silence. Did something happen at work? No, I'm just tired. But his eyes gave him away. Before sleeping, Pedro took the blue folder from the back of the closet. Inside were all his papers, payment receipts, tax returns, letters of reference, even the kids' drawings. He spread them out on the bed, as if trying to convince himself it was enough proof that he deserved to be there. If something ever happens, he told Rosa, you call the pastor, okay? He knows how to help you. Rosa nodded silently, eyes moist. She said nothing, but she knew something had changed. The air in that house, once light and full of hope, was now heavy, as if fate itself was holding its breath. The house was silent. Rosa spent the day sitting on the couch, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. She called Pastor Esteban, who came immediately. He brought bread, words of comfort, and a folder with contacts for immigration lawyers. We'll try to get a quick hearing, he said calmly, but you know how it works. It can take a while. Or it might be too late. Camila stayed in her room all day. She didn't want to eat. Emiliano cried himself to sleep, clutching his dad's shirt. Meanwhile, Pedro was in a cold cell with 8 other men. Most were workers like him. Some were caught at the market, others at the bus stop. A younger man named Luis shook uncontrollably. My dad doesn't even know where I am, he said, voice trembling. Nobody knows. Pedro put his hand on his shoulder. You're not alone. This isn't the end. But inside him, everything seemed to be falling apart. When the officer returned with papers, Pedro tried to argue. I pay taxes. I have 2 kids. I have a fixed residence. I've never committed a crime. That doesn't matter, the officer replied without looking up. You entered illegally. This is a removal order. They waited for days, not knowing what was coming, not seeing the kids, not even changing clothes. Rosa's messages didn't get through. Calls were brief and monitored. They're okay, she said, trying not to cry. Camila wants to write you a letter. Pedro gripped the phone tightly. Tell her, ... Daddy loves her very much. I'll fight to come back. But deep down, he knew that fight was against a system that didn't see stories. Only status, documents, numbers. And he was just another one. It was early morning when a guard woke Pedro. Time to go, he said. Without looking him in the eyes, they dressed him in an orange jacket, handcuffed his wrists, and shackled his ankles, as if he were dangerous, as if the shovel he used to plant flowers were a weapon. In the van, other men shared the same silence. Some prayed, others stared at the floor, all with the same lost look of those being forcibly torn from a life they had built brick by brick. When they arrived at the airport, Pedro didn't even know where he was going. He was just handed a paper with 3 words written in pen, Guatemala City, direct. On the plane, he was placed in the last row. An ICE agent sat beside him as an escort. He looked out the window and saw the sunrise paint the sky orange. It was the same sky he saw every day at 6 a.m. before leaving for work. Only now he was leaving without saying goodbye to the house, the street, the gardens, the children. Tried to remember the smell of Camila's hair, Emiliano's laughter, Rosa's touch. Upon landing in Guatemala, 2 local agents greeted him. They handed him a bag with his belongings, wallet, Dead cell phone, the old Bible, not a penny in his pocket, no destination. He stood for long minutes at the airport gate, not knowing where to go. He was in his homeland, but he did not feel at home. He was a stranger in both worlds. On a borrowed phone's screen, he saw a photo sent by Rosa, Camila holding his shirt in her lap, Emiliano holding a handmade sign. "Come back, Dad." Pedro held back tears. There, on the hot, dusty sidewalk of the city he left 14 years ago, he felt the weight of exile without bars. Free, but completely lost. Pedro found shelter at a distant cousin's house in a small village on the outskirts of Guatemala City. A simple room with a thin mattress on the floor and a small window overlooking nothing. The cousin got him a job carrying bags of cement at a construction site, for less than half of what he earned in a day in the United States. He didn't complain. He just lowered his head and worked. At night, he called Rosa by video chat. The connection was unstable. Sometimes he saw only pieces of her face. Sometimes the screen froze just as Camila said, "I love you. They ask about you every day." Rosa said, "Emiliano dreams about you. He wakes up calling your name." Pedro smiled, but inside he felt shattered. He tried to be strong, but the absence was a slow poison. He lived between two time zones, working under the Guatemalan sun and dreaming of the streets of Encino. One day, Rosa called with swollen eyes. "Mr. Goldberg sent a message," he said. "The garden is dying. He asked about you." Pedro took a deep breath. "Tell him I'm sorry, that I'm grateful for everything, but now I'm just a memory." In the village, no one knew him. He was just Pedro, the deported, the man who came back with nowhere to go. The elders looked at him with pity, the young with suspicion. One silent night, sitting under the starry sky, Pedro wrote, "I have 2 American children, a home I cannot visit, a life that goes on without me. They tore me away as if I were a mistake, but all I did was love that country, with work, with silence, with dignity." He didn't know if he would ever return, but he knew his story wouldn't be erased, because even far away, he was still a father, still a husband, and still human.